we're going to be talking about today is really trying to clarify the role of parent. What is that, as opposed to the friend to parent, like somebody mentioned. And I think about that in the Torah, you know, if we're going to assume that every word is significant and, you know, space is a premium, there's a lot of time, a lot of verses in the Torah that are spent on naming and listing in a very organized fashion, lists of names of families, right? This isn't the only time this happens. There's a lot of numbers, generations, and really where the Torah gives us a listing of the organized structure of the different families. And this seems really important because that is the health of our families is as healthy as they are clearly defined in the roles and the relationships. And I think it's kind of an inside-out approach. The significance to me of families in the larger scheme of what's going on in the world around us is that in the same way that somebody had mentioned that our internal process and our internal wounds are often what make us not the best parents or what gives us the problems and the challenges we have being a parent. In the same way, I think, right, so that's like the inside out from yourself to your family. And in the same way, what happens in the family, if those are healthier institutions, there's just this kind of flow and people raised in healthier, stronger families will then go out into the world around them and engage socially in a different way. So I think it's micro. Families they're small, but they're macro. They're huge in that if we can really work on creating healthier and stronger spaces in our families, I think it's directly related to the larger social risks that we're seeing around us. Which brings us to our talk today.
Ayla, would you like me to put
yeah.
the two worksheets up on the screen, or would you rather talk?
I actually have them up.
Okay, great.
On my own screen. I was just telling Nicole, I really am very uncomfortable with this online platform. I just started school like a couple of weeks ago, and it's all kind of online, so I'm slightly more savvy than I would have been like 2.5 weeks ago, kind of figuring this out. Let's talk about Article 1, How to Raise an Adult. Also, really recommend that book. And I want you to think about, you know, this is sort of my approach. It's the inside-out approach. So a lot of the questions and discussion points are kind of personal because I really do believe our greatest awareness grows. Wow, I don't know, something weird just happened to my screen. Sorry, 1 second. You know what? I'm just going to go with it. If you're having trouble seeing me, let me know. But I think that it's okay. Okay. So I want you to think about that. It's, you know, as self-aware as we are, we're more effective around us. And if you can see these things in yourselves and in your own families, you'll be better equipped to handle it and work with it in people around you. So I am aware this is kind of personal, and I hope that's comfortable. But I think that that's really where we learn best. So that being said, okay, I think I just got my screen set. That being said, what are your thoughts about the chapter about how to raise an adult, which really went into the 4 parenting styles, looking at the demanding responsiveness scale. And I want you to think about yourself and your own parents, and if you're comfortable to share about that. I'm happy to start. I was raised by, you know, she does mention that immigrant families often have the more authoritarian, right? Am I getting the right authoritarian? I'm always mixing up with the authoritative, but you know what I mean. The authoritarian, yes, where there was a high demand and very little emotional responsiveness. And what about the rest of you? What was your experience? Let's start with your own parents. If you looked at that scale of permissive, indulgent, authoritative, neglectful, and authoritarian.
So this is Lisa. I think that my parents were pretty authoritarian.
Okay.
Because they were my friends, but they were the boss. And there definitely were rules in the household. but they were loving in applying the role. So that's what I think.
It's Barrett. My parents they sort of straddled that line between authoritarian and neglectful. They picked and chose their battles when they were authoritarian, but when it came to any sort of conflict or sort of, physical need, chronic illnesses and things, they totally went into that neglectful, like stick their head in the sand kind of place.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Evie, I think my parents were authoritative, and what I think I appreciated, and I just recently reminded my mom of this as she's turning 85, is an incident when I was a teenager, really just quickly, and there was a party going on across the street, and I really wanted to go to the party, but the parents weren't home, and my mom said no. And I remember being really, really upset with her, and after about 20 minutes of hysteria, she came into my room, and my window faced the front of the house, so I could see all these kids going to the party. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm really sorry. I know this is upsetting to you. I'm only doing what I think I should be doing. And, this parenting thing is hard, and I don't know that I'm doing the right thing. But I just, I just feel like this is the right thing." And I just remember stopping to cry at that moment and just appreciating the fact that she was having a hard time with her decision. It wasn't something that she just sort of said, because I say so, that she really sort of felt my pain at that moment, but then also was just saying, I'm just trying to do the best I can do as being a parent. And I just really remember appreciating that as a 15-year-old. And I have to say that I did use that with my own kids often. Because it was felt humanized, like it was just a human honesty that I appreciated. And my almost 37-year-old oldest child just recently shared about a month ago something with me where he appreciated a response that I gave him when he was a teenager. And I went, oh, thank God he remembers something positive. But anyway, it just kind of like what comes around goes around is what came to mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I would just kind of highlight that what your mother was doing there, which is a really important skill when we think about walking this line of, we need to be clear in our role as parents, right? And you can fill an educator there too. It's really the same principles apply. There needs to be a distinction. There needs to be a separation. I am not your friend, I'm your parent. But a really important tool is sharing your process. And she mentions that in the chapter briefly, and she'll talk about it more later on in the book. Communicating with your children or with your students, your process, meaning what you're feeling and what you're thinking in what you're doing, is a really valuable tool that allows us to be connected and responsive, but still stay firmly rooted in our role, is sharing your process. Right, which is what I think I heard you say that your mother did, which is even a little bit different, and on top of, in addition to giving you compassion and telling you that she cared and like she saw your pain, it was giving you a glimpse into her process. Like, I am human too, and this is how I come to these decisions. This is what I struggle with. Is a really, really valuable tool for finding ourselves in that sweet spot of role definition while staying connected.
It's funny.
You already sort of jumped the gun into the next one, which we'll talk about. So I want you to hold that thought. You said it's what goes around comes around. We're going to talk more sort of about how you engage with your children or with your students. Where would you fall on that? And we can look at the relationship between the two, your parents, and then how you engage with your children or with your students. Look at that link, if there is one, and how you went about moving from one to the other.
Baila, someone was going to say something. I didn't hear.
Okay, I still want to hear from everybody.
It was me, Barrett. I was laughing because as you were saying, explaining your process, the thing I got in trouble most for as a child was asking why.
help me understand why the rule is that if I go out with a girl, my curfew is X, but if I go with a boy, it's much later, right? Like, I wanted to understand so that I could honor it and sort of get it, but that was never explained. So, and then as you say, how do you do things with your kids? For sure, that's part of the pendulum of how I parent my kids. That's very funny.
Okay, so you're also moving ahead, and you can see that you pendulum, meaning you swung away from that because you didn't like that, and so now you kind of are on the other end of the spectrum in terms of sharing your process. Yeah.
So this is Jody. I would say that my parents are on the cusp of authoritative to permissive, indulgent, and I would say that over the course of my 45 years, they moved from more authoritative to more now permissive, indulgent, as parents of adult children.
Sure.
And however, because it's interesting to label it when I feel that in many ways they were permissive, indulgent because there weren't any other options. Like they didn't have the money to be able to do anything. So it wasn't like they were indulgent with anything more than their love. So in some ways I would put them as permissive, indulgent because they were very loving and none of us really pushed their boundaries. So I don't know if that was because they were innately authoritative or it was, I always say to my parents, was it just that we were so straight and narrow? I don't know what the answer is to that, but I would say that they span the spectrum of that. But as we have become adults, I see them as much more permissive, indulgent, and would do anything and think that like we walk on water, even more than their grandchildren do, which is very in opposition of most parents. Like my parents are like, the four of you are the best people in the entire world. There's nothing you could do wrong.
So I'll piggyback on. Oh,
go ahead.
it's Yanni. I was just going to piggyback on what Jody just said. I think my parents think my son walks on water. I joke that I had him. They had me to have him. But I was raised, I would say, but like Jody was, with authoritative, but also permissive, indulgent. But I think the reason that it worked, and I would say that I raised my son the same way, is that we didn't give them reason as kids to have to parent differently. Like Jody, we certainly were not perfect. We were not goody two-shoes. But when they imposed a rule, we had earned the reason to have that rule. And so we pretty much obeyed it. And I find with my son, too, that I've raised him with a lot of open communication. And he knows if there's some sort of repercussion to his actions, like a new restriction or a punishment of some kind, that it's rare enough that something he's done has actually warranted that. But there was just always a lot of trust in my house. And the expectation was like, if you're not home by X amount of time, you're going to call us before that time and you're going to tell us why you deserve to be out later and when you'll be home. And if we approve, you'll stay out later. And if we don't, you're going to be home when you're supposed to be. And so I think because it worked for the three of us, that's what I have, developed in raising my own child as well.
Thank you. And I think what I hear you saying also in already going to the last couple of points is that you had a positive experience with your parents and their parenting style, and you've kind of replicated that and you've practiced.
Very positive. Yeah. And unlike, the stereotypical Jewish parents, I don't have invasive, nosy, controlling, like those aren't my memories of them. I find with my parents, in fact, you try to incite them to meddle when you need them, and they're like, we're staying out of it. But so that's sort of funny. They're sort of anti-Jewish stereotypical parents, but it worked for us. It worked for us. And I think we grew into a really meaningful relationship with our parents as parents, and we respect them and we feel like we have their respect in turn, but we can engage with them as friends also without blurring a line. And so I think that's, I definitely feel very fortunate in that that's how I was raised. And I'm fortunate that I've been able to imitate that, with Max, with my son.
I'm really interested and I'm actually just looking at some research that our agency did recently, and they're talking about how teens today are reporting sort of the influence that their parents have on them, as opposed to different generations where we were much more likely to rebel. But these kids are very, very close to their parents, and in some ways see them as friends. And that is just, indicative of a generation. It's not a value judgment on the way parents are raising kids now, but it changes the dynamic. And when you sometimes have to go back and be the educator and the authority and go to a kid and their parent who the kid is looking at as an ally, all of a sudden there's a different kind of relationship that's being created, as opposed to in the past, like if a teacher called home, that teacher believed who did that teacher believe? That teacher believed the parent. I'm sorry, the parent believed the teacher, not the other way around. And it's a really interesting thing. And teens are actually also reporting much more about how their grandparents are also influencers on them as well. And that's a really powerful thing, that they're much more connected generationally than maybe we'd seen before.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, that data and that research is a lot of what's being responded to in How to Raise an Adult. And it does seem to be a kind of growing new reality and a generational shift. And, it's like what I have this similar role as being that sort of educator a lot of times with the families at Beit Teshuvah, and, the parents and children are very symbiotic and bonded and allied in a way that I am so unaccustomed to, right? My teacher would call, and there was no question who my parents would believe, I didn't even get a say, right? It's a totally different dynamic. And what I'm often doing with parents is telling them it's not a value judgment. It really isn't, right? It's just a question of effectiveness. And I think about that a lot. Like, something about that model isn't working well. It's easy for me to say that because usually when I'm talking to parents about that, their kid is in rehab. So I have a pretty compelling case to say that this sort of more symbiotic relationship isn't working well for your family. But I encourage you to really read How to Raise an Adult, and also Excellent Sheep, and a lot of these publications that are saying that even on a larger scale, this sort of new model of parenting isn't working well, and that it's very much a response and reactive to historical things and, mass media, where people live with a lot more fear, and that puts them in this much more, hibernating mode, like us inside here, tight, us against the world kind of model of families, and it isn't really working well. And it's exactly what is working against when we talk about the second article where we had those points. I'm trying to pull that up, but helping people.
Baila,
yes.
Can I just jump in for a minute? Because
Sure.
I think that one of the things that certainly that Julie Lidcott-Haynes and William Deresiewicz and Dr. Lisa Miller spoke about was this sense, this connection with the parents, and this obedience really comes from this dependence in how the parents have made the children their investments, and what have you done? What have you done for me lately? You know what I mean? And how are you being, very funny, Les, how are you being, what do I need to do to get you to be successful? The writing the papers and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that this lack of this symbiosis that some kids talk about is really a much more fear-based dependency. What do you think?
Well, because I think, Mark, raising a teenager right now, I think it's so hard for them to have, it's almost impossible for them to have independence when you can track them on Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook, and when they miss school for a doctor's appointment and the school calls you and says, just so you know, your child wasn't here between the hours of such and such and such and such. There's Big Brother is all over them. And so we have the ability to be all over them. Whereas when we were growing up, our parents were like, I want you home at 5. And they have no idea where we were until 5 or what we were doing. But I think it helped to, it surely forged an independence that now we as parents have to be able to relinquish, as opposed to it being the norm. right? And so I think it's that in and of itself, the deciding to give your kids the independence is the antithesis of what we do when we give them their phone and allow them to open a Facebook account and allow them to open an Instagram or send them to a school that has an electronic portal that says, your kid wasn't here. If I cut class, my parents didn't know. They said, how was your day? My report card was okay. That was it. My son cuts class and I get a call, right? So it's just totally different.
Well, I think.
Yeah, I guess we had it.
Not that I ever cut class, of course, you know.
Sure, so this is Lisa. To that point, Yanni, I think that this is a challenge. It's not just the parents who are hovering, right? It's actually their whole world is hovering. All their friends are hovering because they're Instagramming and Snapchatting. Their school, their teachers are hovering because they can FaceTime with everybody. And so what they do to get out of that spotlight is what we need to be worried about. You know, those are the things, that's where they go and engage in their unsafe behaviors. Where can we go when we're not looking? And so that's also an impetus that makes some parents feel pressure to be more on top of them, to not give them the freedom to have this time outside. And I think that's a big challenge for parents to know, when is it safe to let go and when do I have to be aware and involved? I think that balance is a real challenge for parents today, because you want to give them the freedom. No, you want to give them the freedom to make their own mistakes, but sometimes those mistakes are really scary. So how do you as a parent manage that?
Yeah, and this really is so much of the conversations I have with my clients at Beit in a very high stakes kind of a way, right? It's that question just on steroids where they're telling me, yeah, it's easy for you to tell me to back off and my kid needs to dig deep and find their own motivations to be sober and I should stop paying their cell phone bill and giving them a place to stay. But the stakes are that they'll be on the street with a needle in their arm and they could really very likely die, right? And, you know, it's a hard thing to say, but that doesn't make it less true that if our idea of ourselves as parents is to protect our children, we're ineffective and our children will never become people who can take care of themselves. And even to those parents, it's painful, it's a high stakes kind of game of Russian roulette, but my recommendation is the same thing. You still have to. The fact that it's difficult and the fact that we live in a world that makes it easier to stay super involved, that makes it easier to be a hovercraft to your children, and the fact that we live in a world that is scarier than it used to be and we have so much input that it makes it harder, doesn't make it less important, doesn't make it less true, right? Because, you know, we're kind of jumping around and I see that we only have like 15 more minutes, but I want to look at the, where did I have, you know, the list of things that make people autonomous adults, right? They need to have intrinsic motivation. They need to have autonomy. They need to have a sense of competence and connection. And those things they don't develop where there isn't independence. Those things don't develop where there's a symbiotic, protective, hovering relationship. And this is what our children need to succeed in the world, in a world where hopefully we won't be around for their whole lives, right? That's kind of the world as we hope it would be. And we want them to be able to function independently in the world. And so, not because it's easy or comfortable, and I'm so aware of this because, like I said, the people I'm saying this to, they have real, clear, and present dangers. The stakes are incredibly high, and it's still true, though. It's still true. You know, I often use this metaphor that, you know, if someone, every time they get to the edge of the cliff and are about to jump, you catch them, you're right. You know, they'll never fall, but they'll also never learn to stop hanging out on the edge, right? If we have parents who are continually catching people and being their safety net, those people will continue to put themselves in danger. the only way for people to stop doing that, to learn that, oh, if I jump off a cliff, I'm going to fall and have a really hard landing, is if they experience that, right? And that's harsh. It's harsh to hear as a parent. But even as educators, right, that is the gift of failure. That's exactly what the gift is. The gift of failure is the gift of learning cause and effect, of learning consequences. And when we protect our children so much, when we rescue, when we rush in, and when we hover, that gift, the gift of learning what happens when I fail, what happens when I jump off the cliff, they never get that. And as omnipresent as we feel like we can be in our children's lives and our students' lives, we're not. There's times, and like you said, pockets of time where they're going to be on their own and where we can't be present. And that's when what they have, their internal resources will kick in. And have we engaged with them in a way that help them build any kind of internal resources for those moments and those corners where they don't have anybody else around telling them what to do and scooping them up when they fall down?
So can I just say, I don't know whether Jody and Ira and everybody on the call has experienced what I'm thinking about, which is, why is it so difficult for parents to realize that their children actually need to make mistakes, or need to be able to be held accountable for things that they made not such great decisions about? It feels like, different than certainly my generation on some level, parents are afraid to kind of let their kids make those mistakes. There's this, someone used the term helicopter, but there's a sense like, a protectiveness that feels out of whack on some level. And I don't know whether it has to do with the larger societal context where just the world feels more frightening at this point, although, I don't know. Yeah. Oh, Barrett.
Evie, I'm not sure it's always about fear. I think there's a lot of fear out there. But I think there's also a sense, not to change the subject, but sometimes, we hear people talking, and I think rightly so, about the wrong images young girls get from the media of what they should look like. And I think that there is a version of that, particularly for younger parents, that, I'm supposed to produce children who are perfect. I will get my child into the proper schools. I will do this for my child. I will make this happen. And somewhere along the line, they may not have picked up the thing where it's, you can give them roots, you can give them wings, and the rest is up to them. And, it's this, and it's the 24/7 programming, which also fits into the parent's schedule. I don't have children in my school who are available for a pickup basketball, football, or baseball game after school any day of the week. I played 3 days a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays was Hebrew school. The other 3 days, whatever the guys were doing, that's what I was doing in the neighborhood. That doesn't happen anymore. Everything is programmed, and part of it is because we want our kids to be perfect. Part of it is because we're so crazy busy, we need the place to have them be that we can trust, and part of it is probably fear. I think it's all three.
Yeah.
So
I think there's another piece of this, that there's so many dynamics, larger social, historical things, as well as sort of personal, interpersonal. I think we cannot discount the significance of the Holocaust and how it really changed how we engage in families, because that was just a huge generational trauma that hit everybody all around and changed people's way of being emotionally in their families and everything. But I think that something significant is also, Ira, you talked about some ideas like these sort of values or premises, like that this is what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have a perfect kid. This is what we're supposed to look like. And there's another supposed to that's something that we can, I want to share this one because it's something you can work on and that has bearing on every area of your life. It's sort of a departure from, Eastern thinking to Western, and our Western society has taken it and is running with it. this idea that life, a good life, is a pain-free life, right? This is such a should that is behind so much of what we do and how we feel about how we feel. That that life is supposed to be pain-free. That a good life, that success in whatever it is if it feels good, right? This is such a marked departure from earlier thinking, and certainly where Eastern thinking is right now is that, you know, Buddhist philosophy would say it isn't your pain, it's your resistance to your pain that causes your suffering. Pain is part of life, right? But we have moved so far, and our society invests so much in feeling good. We hate feeling bad. That's a huge change. That's a huge cultural change that impacts everything. The idea that we're not supposed to feel bad. The idea that we have things that are bad and are good in terms of feelings. That's life. It's a full range of emotion. We're sad and we're ashamed and we're guilty and we're helpless and we're powerless and we're hopeful and we're grateful and we're joyful. Right? That's just the range of experience. But we as a Western society are just hurtling down this trajectory away from the idea of life has pain and a range of emotions, and that we really suffer from our inability to tolerate pain. That's how we suffer. And that's so much, you know, as parents, it's this idea that our kids shouldn't feel sad, disappointed, rejected. There's a value there. There's a should that we carry, I think, that makes it really difficult to see our kids fail, be in pain, be rejected. And it shouldn't be that way.
No, you're right.
So
And
can't talk.
yeah, no, and in fact, I mean, look, they're teaching happiness as a course at Harvard. And, you know, and we brought one of the guys in 2 years ago to teach adults. We had 200 people in the room at $5 a head, and we never charged for adult ed. People want, and I think happiness is a horrible, horrible goal. Because you can't be happy all the time. You need, as Arlo Guthrie once said, you need to have a light, you need a dark to stick it in. You need contrast. You need all of the things, and all the pain that we learn from. And my concern is that if we keep holding happiness out as the goal, whenever they don't feel it, they feel they're a failure.
Exactly. If our kids, and this is true for yourselves, but certainly for your children and your students, if our goal is for them to be happy, you know, then hover, parent, all the permissive, indulgent makes a whole lot of sense. And it makes it really difficult to have a very clear idea of your role as a parent and to keep firm boundaries and to really prepare them for a life of success. Because if your goal is for them to be happy, you know, that's just a whole different idea of what your role as a parent is and what your expectations for your child is. And also, I mean, it's just not realistic, because the wisdom is still, that's still true, that in resisting pain, we suffer, right? In trying so hard to be happy, we suffer. In prioritizing feeling good, which comes along with hating, not feeling good, hating when we're anxious, hating when we're sad.
Right, but it's,
you know,
also,
your kids are going to suffer.
I think it also has to do with thinking, or somehow creating a construct where you believe everybody else is happy, right? A lot of the struggle that they have is that they look around them and they see one side of life shows up on Facebook, because nobody puts the crap up on Facebook. And that's what's going on Instagram and all of their lives around them. They see everybody else seeming to be happier or doing better. And so that's their struggle. So that's why they turn to something that might make them feel better in that moment when it's not the right choice, because they're trying to get out of their discomfort. And in terms of parents, I don't know that we're guiding them toward this track, but I think the parents are also struggling with the same competitive forces that, you know, in these big neighborhoods. I live in the town that's the #1 high school in New Jersey. And my middle kid has had the most challenging time even getting the upper grades, because she thought everybody was still doing better. This is a kid who got an 800 on the math SAT and thought it wasn't good enough, but there was no way for her to go. But she still felt that there were others who had more criteria, more credentials, and she wasn't going to get into the school because all of this pressure that everybody else is doing a little bit better. And so that drives them to do things that is not making them feel self-sufficient. They're not feeling confident. They're not feeling capable, even when they might be. You know, even their capability, they can't even own.
Yeah, we were just talking
Baila?
about this in a meeting about sort of like how we don't provide, you know, first of all, these kids live in an age where everything is curated, right? So everything that they see online is carefully put out there by someone else in their universe, which also means that they're, you know, creating, they want their sort of outer persona to look like, but also, and that also leads to like, that, you know, that sort of sense of, you know, you know, being like everybody else and whatever, and not encouraging that authenticity. But when we were talking about also how we cultivate spiritually minded kids who, you know, have something deeper, and like we don't teach them about that authenticity, about providing the space and the time for themselves to really ask the questions and answer them the way that they should be answered. And that for us is like such an important part of our job, that developmentally, like that's so much a part of who these teens are, is that they've got to be able to answer the big questions about the world for themselves and in our spaces, because they don't often have opportunities to do that in their daily lives.
Yeah. And I hope, I'm not sure if it was on the reading list, but if you haven't read it yet, read Lisa Miller's The Spiritual Child. It's a fabulous book. And I think so much of what I'm hearing is that it's such a challenging time for our children, for our young people, for us to maintain our intrinsic motivation. We are bombarded with ideas and images of how we should be as people, as women, as men, as families, as parents, as teens, right? This is it's a more difficult time than ever to be intrinsically motivated, which only makes it more compelling that we structure our parenting and our educational institutions toward helping foster that, right? All that we and our children have in a world like this, they are bombarded with messages that really are at their core are shoulds, about how they should be, all about external motivations, extrinsic motivations. It becomes so important that to balance the feedback, the input that they're getting from the world around them. And I'm not just talking about our kids and our students, I'm talking about us, because we, as you pointed out, we're struggling with the same things that we really work on in ourselves and with them doing, and the kinds of parents, role models that help create a space where they can grow intrinsic motivation. And it kind of is circling back to, you know, sharing your process. Sometimes these things are fairly, you know, these are huge issues. And as we've kind of discussed, there's so many factors here. It's a huge, you know, it's historical, it's social, it's coming at us from all directions, and it's a huge wave, and it's a change, like someone said. It's just different than it used to be, and it's big. And what we can do sometimes are the small things. I think when we talked earlier about modeling, mirroring, really just sharing your process as a parent or as an educator, what you're modeling is authenticity. And someone just mentioned that at the end, right? That's a huge tool, authenticity. By sharing your process, you're modeling authenticity. And that's a huge counterbalance to all of this extrinsic motivation, to all of these cues that we're getting from the world around us of how we should be, is our ability to tap into our own authentic experience of who am I? How do I feel? What do I believe in this? And we teach that by modeling that, by giving ourselves permission to be authentic in our interactions with our children and our students. And that's how we create a small pocket of a new kind of experience. We create a small pocket of intrinsic motivation, of self-driven, of being you authentically in a world that is flooding you with messages of how you should be.
I think one of the things
I just want to interrupt for a second. Baila, we have literally a few more minutes before the presentation of, and I just want to confirm who of our participants is presenting today.
I think that's me, Lisa. But
okay.
I only have until 10 after 2. I thought we were done at 2.
Okay. So
We are done. We can wrap this up. I don't want to take away from whoever's presentation that is.
Okay, so I'm going to ask that Lisa presents for these 10 minutes, and then Baila, we could go back and wrap it up and go to that last piece where you had the gift of failure in the last 20 minutes. Does that work for everyone?
Yep.
I mean, I would have to say that we really referenced the gift of failure quite a number of times. I mean, I'm happy to come back if people had questions, but I don't know that there really is material we didn't cover.
Okay.
If you want me to join again at 2:15 or whatever that is, and we can have a couple of minutes for questions, that works.
Okay, that would be great.
I have a 2 o'clock call, everybody. I got to go. I'm sorry.
Okay, so Lisa, if you could present what you're working on for your action research project, that would be fabulous.
Okay, great. So I have made my action research project my capstone for my master's at HUC. And my focus, I sort of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but my focus is finding an avenue for parents of kids who are struggling in high school to find a way to seek help from a higher power, to feel like they can talk to God and they can find the words and the voice to do it. I developed this idea because I experienced at the beginning, right after Beit Shuva actually, and after I wrote my article about my experience, a friend's son died of a drug overdose. And this was someone who had been struggling for years. He was at the Montana Academy, and he was sober for 3 years. And so this was a shock to those of us who didn't know that he had relapsed. And in talking to his parents, who were, of course, devastated, they didn't know where or how to connect with him. They were trying to give him a freedom. I spoke to Mom. She said the day that it happened, she wanted to call him about something she was going to manage for him, but she decided not to because she wanted to let him do it himself. And unfortunately, that was the day that he injected something that was not right, and he lost his life. So, you know, what we were talking a few minutes ago about when do we step in and when do we not, it's really a challenge to figure out what to do and how do we know? And so many of these parents feel alone. Like as Baila said, they're really contracting into themselves when they're struggling with these very big issues. And they might they might disconnect from their friends and their social networks and people who could be their support because they don't want to share it. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they're ashamed. They don't want to admit that their family life is not what the image is, not the name they wanted to put on it. So I'm creating a curriculum where I want to teach the parents that, or no, not teach is not the right word. I want to facilitate an open-mindedness to the idea that there is a higher power that they can rely on, that they're not alone, that even if they can't speak to their friends about something, that perhaps they can develop a language and a dialogue that they can share their thoughts and their fears with God, because ultimately, when you're reaching out, you're digging in. And the idea that you're doing some tshuva and looking at yourself and where is your struggle, so that it will be like the parent putting on their oxygen mask first. You know, when the stewardess says, you put on your oxygen mask first and then take care of your kid. That's what I'm hoping that this curriculum will let these parents do.
Lisa, what is a guiding question that you could have for us that we could provide support or suggestions?
The guiding question would be, have you in your experience seen a shift for parents when they open themselves up to something that's so different from what they might already know? there's such a barrier, I think, to even going in this direction. That have you had any success? I look at Beit Shuva as like a template, because using Torah to deal with these big issues is a different template than what I think these parents really think about. And so I guess the big question is, what has been your experience in using Torah as the language of conversing with God? So that's really, I'm not just saying only write up your own prayers. I'm saying look at the words in the Tanakh and how do they give us answers to some of these very big questions.
Okay. Does anyone have any input or suggestions or insight for Lisa?
Is this a curriculum that
Lisa hears from me all the time, so I'm not weighing in.
is this a curriculum that would be for a class that parents would come to, or would it be more like a curriculum that parents would receive and sort of go through on their own?
No, it would be a curriculum that I would be inviting either at a synagogue or for rabbis from different synagogues to make references, and then have a group, because I think that working through these issues together with a community of parents is essential also in developing a support system that's outside of their other groups. So I'm looking for it to be an in-person 6 to 8 class curriculum.
Lisa, you're speaking my language. It sounds like something I would sign up for in a heartbeat. I've got my eldest daughter is battling a lot of mental illness issues right now that has led me to scale back to half-time work so that I can be around to manage those things for her. And the isolation piece that you described with your friends whose son passed away from an overdose is very much that when things were really sort of in crisis mode in November that we felt, right? That it's not that we were embarrassed about talking about our child's challenges, but one, part of it's her story, and two, part of it's ours. But also people don't know what to do with that, and they didn't necessarily have good advice to give. But one of the things I've been advocating for here in Detroit is sort of that kind of family support group with a Jewish perspective. Not necessarily with like parenting skills, but really processing all of that. And I know that for me personally, Rabbi Mark's latest book has been helpful. The way he frames questions with the Parshiot has been great for me to sort of have that reflected and tie it back to text in that way. So I think it's awesome.
Right. I'm reading Mark's book also, and I feel that there's a lot in the Vayigash Parsha that I want to use as a curriculum for one of my classes. So I'm looking to those resources to be resources in this particular program.
Great.
I'm so interested. I was just listening to what you were saying. I just started my doctoral program in social welfare, and we're working on the 12 grand challenges that the Association of Social Workers has identified as the biggest social issues we're facing. And I was really surprised to see that one of them is social isolation. And it's really interesting to me that we were just talking about how we are bombarded, we're constantly connected, and the other side of that is that we have never been more isolated, and all of us are feeling so isolated with whatever it is. And I love that direction of kind of using spirituality and religion, or whatever it is for you, as a solution to isolation. I mean, because that's exactly what it is, because ultimately the true solace comes not from outside, but internally, giving people those internal spiritual resources. And that seems wonderful.
So, and part of this also comes from the fact that in my coursework last semester, I was studying the medieval Jewish philosophers. And there is a medieval Jewish philosopher, Bachya ibn Pekuda, who wrote Duties of the Heart, which became the foundation of Musar later on. And it's all about looking in and doing that cheshbon hanefesh, where we got to figure out what's going on the inside before we can do anything on the outside that's really going to make a difference. And so I'm hoping to use that as a class foundation as well.
That sounds awesome. So you have to go, am I correct?
Yes, I do.
Well, I would end with saying that if you have certain feedback that you would like from us and to send us stuff so that we can reflect on it, all of us, you have the group email, please do, and know that we're here as a resource.
Great. Toda rabah. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry I have to jump off, but I have
Wait,
to.
Lisa, can I just invite those who live in the New York area to your capstone presentation?
Please do. And Mark is going to be in New York on February 28th. So
Yeah, Rabbi will be in New York from February 25th to March 3rd. So just FYI.
So, but he's studying at Machon Hadar, so we have to make sure that Shai's class is not at the time of my capstone.
Okay, and then I would extend the invitation to Solomon and Jody and Yanni and everybody else who's going to be around for that. So I don't know, Lisa, do you want to maybe just send sort of an invitation to everybody on this call? And
I'll send it.
What time is it that day?
It's from 10:05 to 11:25. I'm sharing my time. I'm not sure if I'm first or if Lucy's first. So two of us are in the hour and a half. So it'll be 45 minutes.
Right, and lunch is included as well.
Everybody. I got to go to a meeting. I think it was great. Baila, you did a wonderful job. Thank you. Jody, as always, your leadership just keeps us on track, and it was great seeing everybody. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody. Thank you, Baila. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Lisa.
Invitation.
Does anybody have any last comments or thoughts for Baila about just all of it, how to raise an adult, the gift of failure, the idea of the parenting, and how it influences your life?
I don't, but thank you for leading it.
Okay, Baila, thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Nicole, are you and I?
Oh, sorry, really fast. I don't know if you guys saw or if you're a part of it, but I started a Facebook group, and we think it's really important. We're having all of our past participants, from the rabbinical students to the one-day training, join this Facebook group to post things they're doing, to let us know how the program has still impacted them, what they're doing in their communities, to kind of create a forum for all of us that have been a part of this program. So if you weren't invited for some reason, you weren't on Facebook or I couldn't find you, so please contact me because it's a great forum, and maybe that can have Lisa can post her thing there to start it off as kind of a forum for that type of thing.
All right. Nicole, can you stay on for a minute after everyone gets off?
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.